The freezing current was seconds away from claiming an old man trapped in the icy torrent. The only anchor strong enough to hold the line was a 4-year-old German shepherd standing on a slippery riverbank. Elias faced an impossible choice: dive in untethered and risk drowning, or tie his lifeline to the dog and trust that the animal understood the weight of duty. One slip meant death for all of them. This is the story of how a silent promise between a veteran and his K9 turned a moment of terror into a legacy that still keeps the light alive. December in the Cabinet Mountains wasn't just cold, it was predatory. The blizzard erased the world outside the windshield, leaving only a wall of white. Elias Thorne gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the worn leather. He didn't look like a man on a holiday drive. The harsh Montana windburn on his cheeks and the gray creeping into his stubble marked him as someone who had spent years fighting the elements, not enjoying them. His heavy canvas jacket creaked as he shifted, his eyes sharp and restless, scanning the whiteout for threats that weren't there. Beside him, Kaiser slept with one eye open. The silver-sable German shepherd was a ghost against the dark upholstery. He didn't look like a house pet. His massive paws and the thick ruff of fur around his neck spoke of a working lineage, a retired professional who had traded search zones for a passenger seat. Hiss, crackle. The military scanner on the dashboard spat static. Elias flinched. His hand shot out, snapping the radio off before the noise could settle. He hated static. It sounded too much like confused orders over a comms channel, the kind that got people killed in his past life. Suddenly, Kaiser froze. The dog didn't bark. He simply sat up, his body rigid as a loaded spring. A low, vibrating whine built in his throat, and he pressed his wet nose against the freezing glass. To Elias, the air smelled only of ice. To Kaiser, it smelled of hydraulic fluid and human terror. "What is it?" Elias whispered, the old combat engineer instincts flooding back. Kaiser turned, his amber eyes locking onto Elias with an intensity that demanded action. He nudged Elias's arm, hard. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an alert. Elias killed the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy and dangerous. He looked at the dog, then at the ravine disappearing into the storm. Logic said, stay in the truck. But looking at Kaiser's desperate posture, Elias realized he was receiving a signal he couldn't ignore again. "All right," Elias muttered, grabbing his gear. "I'm listening." They stepped into the storm. Below in the freezing creek, a man was fighting a losing battle against the ice. The roar of the creek was deafening. Down in the black water, the elderly man was pinned against a rusted generator, the current hammering him like a physical blow. He was turning blue. Elias slid down the bank, assessing the situation with clinical speed. Direct entry was suicide. The current would sweep them both away. He needed leverage. He needed an anchor. His hands moved in a blur, fingers numb but precise. He rigged a Z-drag pulley system around a sapling, but the angle was wrong. It wouldn't lift the man clear. He needed a mobile anchor point higher up the slope. He turned to Kaiser. This was the gamble. If the tension spiked, if the machinery shifted violently, it could drag the dog into the freezing torrent. Elias knelt, the snow biting into his knees. He clipped the heavy-duty carabiner to Kaiser's tactical harness. He didn't use his parade ground voice. He leaned in, his forehead almost touching the dog's snout. "Stay," Elias whispered, the word cutting through the wind. "Trust me." Kaiser didn't flinch. The shepherd dug his claws into the frozen earth, lowering his center of gravity until he was a statue of silver fur and muscle. He growled low, not in aggression, but in pure focus. Trust established. Elias grabbed his pry bar and plunged into the waist-deep water. The cold hit him like a shockwave, stealing his breath. He jammed the bar into the wreckage, trapping the old man's leg. "On 3, Elias screamed over the water. 1, 2, 3. He heaved, metal groaned. On the bank, the rope went taut. Kaiser whined, his paws slipping an inch in the snow, but he dug in harder, his hind legs trembling with the strain. He held the line. The generator shifted. The leg came free. "Clear!" Elias hauled the old man up the slope. Kaiser backing up to keep the tension until they were safe on flat ground. They collapsed in the snow, gasping, alive. But the mountain wasn't done with them. The whiteout had thickened into a solid wall. The truck was gone, buried somewhere in the drift. Elias looked at the dark outline of a timber lodge nearby. "We move," he rasped, pulling the old man up, "or we die here." The interior of the Blackwood Outpost was a cavern of shadows and biting cold. The blizzard hammered against the timber walls, finding every crack and loose board, whistling like a mortar shell incoming. It was not much warmer inside than it was out in the storm, but at least the wind was dampened. Elias moved with frantic precision. He had stripped Silas of his sodden, freezing clothes and wrapped the trembling old man in a thermal military sleeping bag found in his pack. Silas was pale, his lips a dangerous shade of blue, his body racking with violent shivers that were slowly fading into a lethargic stillness. This was the critical phase of hypothermia. If he stopped shivering before he was warm, his heart would simply stop. Elias knelt by the fireplace, his hands working to coax a flame from a pile of old newspapers and broken chair legs. The wood was dry, but the chimney was cold, and the smoke curled lazily into the room before the draft caught it. Suddenly, a sharp cracking sound echoed through the lodge. A gust of wind blew out a pane of glass in the east window, sending shards skittering across the floorboards. An icy jet of air blasted directly toward the corner where Silas lay, huddled. Elias cursed under his breath, scrambling to find something, anything, to board up the gap. He grabbed a piece of plywood from a collapsed shelf, but before he could reach the window, movement stopped him. Kaiser had moved. Without a command, without even a glance at Elias, the silver shepherd had risen from his spot near the hearth. The dog walked deliberately to the sleeping bag. He did not nudge the old man. Instead, Kaiser positioned himself perfectly between the broken window and Silas. He lowered his heavy body onto the floorboards, curling his spine into a solid, furry barricade against the draft. Kaiser tucked his nose under his tail, his amber eyes closing to slits, accepting the freezing wind against his own back so that the old man would not feel it. Elias lowered the plywood, a lump forming in his throat. He had trained dogs to bite, to track, to sniff out explosives. He had never trained a dog to be a shield. That was not training. That was soul. From the depths of the sleeping bag, Silas stirred. The fever and the cold were playing tricks on his mind. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, staring past the wooden ceiling into a memory from 1968. "Cap," Silas wheezed, his voice thin and brittle. "You take the 3 o'clock. I will catch a wink. Just for a minute." Elias froze. He looked at the old soldier, seeing the ghosts hovering around him. He did not correct him. He did not tell him the war was over or that they were in a derelict lodge in Montana. He understood the code. Elias walked over and placed a hand gently on the old man's shoulder, his voice dropping to the low, steady rumble of a commanding officer. "Sleep, Sergeant," Elias said softly. "The watch is covered." Silas let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension left his jaw. His eyes drifted shut, and for the first time in hours, his breathing deepened into a rhythmic, peaceful sleep. Elias sat back against the wall, watching the fire finally catch. Across the room, Kaiser lay unmoving in the draft, a silent sentry guarding the perimeter of a stranger's life. The storm broke on the third morning, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of silence. The emergency medical team had arrived shortly after, their snowcats cutting through the drifts to reach the outpost. Now the chaos of the rescue had faded into the antiseptic quiet of the county hospital room. Elias stood by the window, looking out at the distant peaks of the Cabinet Mountains. They were jagged and white, indifferent to the lives they had almost claimed. Kaiser was waiting in the truck outside, but his presence felt close, a phantom weight against Elias's leg. In the bed, Silas Vance seemed to have shrunk. The rugged durability of the mountain man had evaporated, leaving behind a frail figure beneath the thin hospital sheets. The monitors beeped with a slow, fragile rhythm, counting down the seconds of a clock that had been winding down long before the storm hit. It was not the hypothermia that was taking him. It was simply time. The storm had just been the final battle in a long war. Silas stirred. His eyes opened, no longer clouded by the delirium of the cold. They were clear, pale blue, and focused. He turned his head slowly and found Elias. Elias stepped closer to the bedside. He did not offer empty platitudes about recovery. He knew the look of a man who was preparing to leave. Silas reached out, his hand trembling. Elias took it. It was a firm grip, skin like parchment over iron, calloused and scarred. It was the hand of a man who had built things, fixed things, and held the line. When Elias squeezed back, he felt the rough texture of his own palm against Silas's. It was a silent language, a recognition between two soldiers who understood the weight of duty. Silas turned his gaze toward the window, looking past the glass toward the invisible point in the mountains where his outpost stood. "That generator," Silas whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over stone. "I kept it running for 20 years, every bolt, every wire." He squeezed Elias's hand, a sudden surge of desperate strength returning to his grip. He looked back at Elias, his eyes burning with an intensity that defied his failing body. "Do not let it shine alone," Silas said, the words heavy with command. "Do not let it go dark." Elias understood. He was not talking about a machine. He was talking about the light in the wilderness, the beacon for the lost. "I have the watch, Silas," Elias replied, his voice steady. Silas nodded, a faint, satisfied smile touching his lips. The tension left his body. His grip on Elias's hand loosened, sliding away like sand. He exhaled a long, final breath, and his eyes drifted closed. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor changed into a single, high-pitched, continuous tone. The room felt suddenly empty, yet filled with a massive, invisible responsibility. Elias did not call for the nurses immediately. He stepped back, straightened his spine, and brought his heels together. Standing alone in the sterile light of the hospital room, Elias Thorne raised his hand in a slow, sharp salute. He was no longer just a drifter, he was the new keeper of the flame. Elias did not begin the restoration of the Blackwood Outpost with a hammer. He began it with a schedule. Chaos had ruled his life for too long, drifting from one town to the next, fleeing the noise in his own head. Here, in the silence of the mountains, he would build a fortress of order. At 0500 hours, long before the sun crested the jagged peaks of the Cabinet Mountains, Elias was awake. His boots were laced tight. His bed was made with hospital corners. The coffee was black and bitter. With Kaiser at his heel, Elias stepped out into the biting morning air for the perimeter check. They moved through the knee-deep snow with the synchronized rhythm of a patrol unit. Elias treated the property not as a renovation project, but as a forward operating base that needed to be secured. He carried a notebook and a piece of white chalk, marking the territory with the precision of a surveyor. He had no budget for new lumber, so he scavenged. Behind the woodshed, he found a pile of rusted iron rails, likely from an old mining track. They were heavy and ugly, but when Elias cleaned them with a wire brush, he saw the strength of the steel beneath. He used them to brace the sagging roof of the main lodge, bolting the iron into the timber. He mixed clay, ash, and straw to patch the gaps between the logs, sealing the draft that had nearly killed Silas. The work was brutal, but it was honest. Every nail driven was a thought silenced. Every board replaced was a memory secured. Late one afternoon, they were inspecting the structural columns in the great room. To the naked eye, the massive pine beams looked solid, holding the weight of the roof with stoic endurance. Elias moved to the next pillar, but Kaiser did not follow. The silver shepherd stood frozen before a beam near the hearth. He pressed his nose against the dark wood, inhaling deeply. Then he let out a sharp, singular bark, the alert signal for a hidden threat. He scratched at the base of the wood with a frantic urgency. Elias frowned and knelt beside the dog. "Show me," he commanded softly. He took out his tactical knife and pressed the tip against the wood. It should have met resistance. Instead, the blade sank in effortlessly, up to the handle. Elias twisted the knife, and a chunk of the beam crumbled away into dust. Dry rot. It was eating the pillar from the inside out, invisible from the surface, but catastrophic if left unchecked. Elias pulled the knife out and brushed the wood dust from his fingers. He took his chalk and drew a large white X on the damaged beam. He looked at Kaiser, who sat watching him with intelligent amber eyes. "Good boy," Elias murmured, resting his hand on the dog's head. "We caught it early." Elias looked at the rotting wood, then unconsciously touched his own chest, where his own invisible fractures lay hidden beneath a layer of discipline. "If you catch it early," Elias said to the silent room, "it can be saved. Everything can be saved if you catch it in time." A year had passed since the storm that claimed Silas Vance, and winter had returned to the Cabinet Mountains. The wind howled through the valley with the same feral intensity, stripping the trees bare and piling snow against the foundations of the Blackwood Outpost. But this time, the wind did not whistle through cracks in the walls. The lodge stood immovable, a dark shape anchoring the white chaos, glowing with a defiant, golden warmth. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and fresh coffee. Elias Thorne moved behind the reclaimed pine counter, wiping down a steaming mug. The lines on his face seemed less like scars now, and more like the seasoned grain of old oak. The heavy oak door creaked open, admitting a swirl of snow and a group of 4 young hikers. They stumbled in, stomping their boots and shaking off the cold. They were young men, barely 25, wearing tactical backpacks and the distinct, weary posture of soldiers back from deployment, looking for peace in the high country, but finding only a blizzard. Kaiser lifted his head from his spot by the roaring hearth. The silver shepherd did not bark. He stood up slowly, his movements fluid and majestic, and walked toward the strangers. The lead hiker froze, eyeing the massive animal. Kaiser simply sniffed the young man's hand, then lowered his body and rested his heavy head gently on the soldier's wet boot. It was a gesture of absolute welcome. The young men relaxed, shedding their heavy coats and accepting the coffee Elias offered. The warmth of the room seemed to thaw more than just their frozen fingers. One of the hikers, a young man with a high and tight haircut and nervous eyes, looked around the lodge. He looked at the thick timber beams reinforced with iron rails, and then at the black emptiness pressing against the windows. "You live up here all alone, sir?" the young man asked, his voice hushed. "Just you and the dog?" Elias paused in his work. He was polishing a small brass plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "Vance's Outpost, Esther, 1975. "I mean," the soldier continued, gesturing to the sturdy logs. "These walls are thick, but does it not get scary, being the only thing out here in the dark?" Elias looked at the boy. He saw the fear that the young man was trying to hide, the same fear Elias had carried in his own truck a year ago. He looked down at Kaiser, who was now sleeping soundly at the feet of the strangers, his steady breathing filling the quiet moments between the wind gusts. Elias smiled, a rare, soft expression that reached his eyes. "No," Elias said quietly, "the fortress is not the walls, kid." He nodded toward the silver dog and then tapped his own chest. "The fortress," Elias said, "is the Watcher." Outside, the storm raged on, burying the world in white. But in the middle of the valley, the light from the Blackwood Outpost burned steady and bright, a solitary star that refused to blink, signaling to anyone lost in the dark that the watch was covered. The storm may pass, but the watch never truly ends. It is carried in the hearts of those who refuse to let the fire die out. If you believe in protecting what matters most, honor the code by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share your own story of loyalty in the comments below. Your next mission awaits in the video on your screen. Click it now to keep the legacy alive.